Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran Blue Note jazz saxophonist and composer Walter Smith III. He opened up about his new 2023 album called Return to Casual. He signed with Blue Note Records and enters a new era of his band-leading career. This is a long-anticipated follow-up to his self-released 2014 recording, Still Casual. He has always dedicated to collaborative work with some of music's most influential voices, including Terence Blanchard, Gerald Clayton, Harland, Jason Moran, Herbie Hancock, Schneider, Terri Lyne Carrington, and the great Dee Dee Bridgewater. We got a lot to cover, and we do it. Enjoy the interview.
Thank you for taking a minute out for the program today. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, man. I'm a big fan of the album, but before we get into the album, I just kind of want to address what we've all kind of lived through as a planet for the last 3 years, especially now with the world waking up, live shows happening, new albums out. How did you survive COVID? How has it changed the way that you approach things now?
Wow. Right to it then. That is a big question, and I do feel like it's probably not the answer that you're looking for, because for me, one of the things that I've been seeking in the last, specifically the last 15 years since my wife and I had kids, is for some kind of balance between everything you just said, the touring schedule, the releases, the constant. It's not a complaint about work, but the travel piece of it. You know, much of our work in this industry means getting on a plane to be somewhere and then going somewhere else, and you can never really be in charge of your schedule. So missing all the stuff with kids, like Halloween, birthdays, all that kind of stuff over the years, and not really having a say in it, because on the one hand, I want to be there, but the other hand, need to work and pay for our house and all this stuff. So COVID time was, the timing of it was kind of interesting, because we decided to leave LA and move to Boston. I took a position at Berklee College of Music. I'm the chair of woodwind at Berklee, and I started in the fall of 2019. So we had just moved here, and, you know, I was just kind of getting used to that. And the hope was to be able to be in control of my schedule a little more. And then that hit, obviously, in March of 2020, and it was like the thing that I needed more than anything, was just to not be able to go anywhere. You had to be home. And it really put me back in line with, I guess, what's been important to me all along, but I just didn't have a way to really make it a reality. And that year and a half of being home all the time with everything being canceled, it just let me relax for the first time, I feel like, in 15 minutes, and really be present for family and not be so stressed out about all the ins and outs of the traveling and writing and recording, and just kind of take a breath. So I feel like it was something that rejuvenated me in many ways, and like coming out of it, all the stuff that's been happening that's positive, I feel like I would not have been able to appreciate if it had all kind of come to me in the normal, vigorous schedule and, you know, the craziness of what life was before COVID. Sorry for the long answer.
No, it's good, and it really gives me a good expose on where you're at as we lead into talking about this album and your collective life and music. And it's interesting, because all of the interviews that I was doing at the time, and I really ramped up, I kept thinking there's going to be a lot of people, big-name musicians, that may never come back. They'll realize that solace is so good. But your answer, it's interesting. Anytime people go in with a positive spin, there's a hesitation. And I think in our PTSD brain of dealing with going through this thing, I think there's not a really good way, there's not going to be a good way for years to come for us to quantify it, but there are so many people that have said that. You know, the Earth even responded. You know, the canals in Venice cleared up. The smog in Beijing went away. The environmental destruction that was going on. And even in America, you know, while this was raging, we have a really bad problem with class and race and dealing with things that we've let just go because we're moving so fast. So it's almost as though Mother Nature said, all right, guys, we're going to close it down. We're going to dig within. And, you know, now finally mental health is an issue that people don't say, oh, we'll get over it. It's a serious thing that people are contemplating about. So I think with what you're saying and just in general, I think there's a lot of us as human beings that are more aware and cognizant of the fact that, you know, we need to embrace empathy and feel for each other as humans.
Well said. Right on the nose there.
So, you know, and I guess from my perspective of watching this happen, it was really heartbreaking to hear all the musicians that had enormous plans that just immediately fell away like the end of a Tetris game. And now that Tetris board is filling back up. You know, you have an album, Return to Casual, live shows are happening. How good does this feel?
Well, it's bittersweet because, like you said, there are some projects that I was really excited about that went away that did not resuscitate when it was okay to do so. And a lot of things that I waited on because I wasn't sure about going back out. I didn't want to be one of the first people to be back out recording, so I had to pass on a lot of stuff. It was interesting, but, you know, again, that I believe it's called FOMO, the fear of missing out situation. I really kind of came to terms with that. And towards how I'm looking at projects that I'm involved with now, like this album in particular, it was really, you know, the first time that I sat down and thought about, like, okay, what do you really want to do? And the starting point, the thing that I was most excited coming out of the pandemic was that I had scheduled a week at the Vanguard, and then that got, you know, it looked like it was going to be for sure safe to do because it was this past February of 23. So they booked so far out. I had that as a beacon. I was like, okay, so that is going to be where I'm going to put my next project together. And I know that I want to play with this band. So that was kind of the starting point. And it was the first time that I feel like I made a decision just based on, you know, what is it that I want to do, not thinking about any other piece of the equation that so often kind of comes into your mind when you're putting things together, especially recording projects.
So you're on Blue Note. Is there a little portion of you, like a kid version of you within that's just totally bespeckled by the notion that you're on one of the most powerful jazz labels ever?
I mean, don't minimize this. No, it's the whole version of me. Yeah, it's like one of the most exciting things that, you know, that could happen as far as a record label, because it's, you know, for me, on the one hand, it never was a goal, but it was always like that thing where it's like, well, if that happened, it would be cool. When you look at the landscape now, it doesn't change a whole lot in terms of, you know, being able to release music, getting it in front of people, having it wherever it needs to be. All those things are possible if you just want to do it by yourself. But for people that came up, I'm 42 now, came up like buying CDs and doing that whole thing, there was like a whole point in my life where I was just buying records based on the label that they were out on. So all the Blue Note records that I bought are, you know, they're like moments in my life where I feel like I got so much better as a musician, as a saxophonist, as a composer. They mark a lot of important things on my timeline, and to be a part of that now is really, it's not a little kid version. It's like literally the 42-year-old kid that is like really excited about it.
So speaking of that, being kind of, you know, both a musician and a fan, take me back to your childhood. What was the first live show you saw that really blew you away, that either made you want more or made you want to get on that stage?
The first live show that I ever went to was, as far as like a big concert, was Kenny G, the G-Force tour. And I don't know if you're familiar with the saxophonist Bob Reynolds. He plays with Snarky Puppy and all kind of people, but he did a post about playing in this theater. He's from Jacksonville, Florida. He played in this theater, and he like remembered this whole thing that happened to him at his first concert, which was also Kenny G. And we had the exact same experience where he does this part of it where he walks around circular breathing, and he kind of walked right up to me. I was in the aisle seat, and he just kind of walked right up to me, and the spotlight was there, and he was just doing it. And I don't know what about that was exciting to me if I look at it now, but I remember at the time it was like amazing. So that was like the the first concert that had an impact, and I think I was somewhere around 8 or 9 at that point.
Being in that position where you watched major people play, and you played around with major people on stage as well, what was the stage that you finally got the chance to play on where you were like, I can't believe this is happening?
Sorry, I lost you for 1 second.
Sorry.
Being around. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, what stage did you finally get to play on that maybe you dreamed about, where you finally got on it and you're like, man, I can't believe I'm here?
So many. I mean, all the ones that I had heard of before I got there. There was, some of them were festivals, so not a specific stage, but just being at one of these festivals that you hear about for years, something like a North Sea Jazz Festival, or here in the States, the Monterey Jazz Festival, Carnegie Hall, Kennedy Center, any of those places. And then again, going back to the part where you said the kid and what's the thing that they want the most? So like an album on the Blue Note label, it was playing at the Village Vanguard. So I remember the first time I played there was with Terence Blanchard years ago. And that was, it was like one of those things where I had the resume updated, and I just needed to wait until that evening ended to hit the Apple S to save it.
Of all of the facets, and this has been kind of a theme that we talked about early on in the conversation, of all of the facets that go into being a professional musician, you have recording, you have teaching, you have live gigs, you have all of this promotion, everything. What is it that gets you up and motivated every day? What drives you in your capacity as a professional musician now?
Just being able to play and work with my peers. And see what they come up with, and being inspired by that, and really wanting to do something that holds up the standard to what they're all doing. And by peers, I don't just necessarily mean people of my age group or generation. I just mean everybody that's playing and recording, still going to see live shows. At the heart of it, if you don't love this and really actually enjoy hearing music and playing, then it doesn't really have a lot of things as a career that would be rewarding or make sense to do it. So it's that kind of joy that I get from hearing people and finding out about a new record that I've never heard before that's older than I am, or whatever it is. All those things are still really exciting to me. And when I get the opportunity to see and hear that, it makes me want to come home and practice.
So let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into a much younger version, a 20-year-old version of yourself, and based on everything you've lived through and seen and the wisdom you've gained, you could give that young version of you a piece of advice. What would you tell your young version?
It's the same thing I always say when I answer this question. Buy Apple stock.
Yes. Yes, indeed. I like it. I remember years ago, I used to run a couple of computer labs for the YMCA, and we got a grant, and we got Macs in like 2002. And it was when Apple was nothing. Like the phones weren't out. They were kind of on the downward spiral, but working their way up. And I just was like, who's going to use an Apple? What is this? Because, there was Dells and Gateways. So it's amazing how far those guys have come now and how dominant they are in the world.
Yeah, it's funny because from my side of things, it's always been that. And, it kind of marked my time in college. I remember starting, we were talking about going and buying CDs, all that kind of stuff. When I started college in the fall of 1998, that's what I was doing, Tower Records, all of that. And by the time I got out of college in 2002, 4 years later, all of that was gone, and I had an iPod, and it felt like that was like the biggest revolution. And, little did I know it was leading to the downfall of everything that I had planned on doing. But I feel like that iPod and the whole digital music thing really, to your point, put them in a place where they took over the whole world.
It was revolutionary. I still remember and still have my first generation one. And when I had that, oh, dude, it was the coolest thing ever. Like, you mean I can take my whole CD collection and put it in this one little box, you know, and just go crazy.
Have you ever seen, I mean, it's a little after, but seen those videos of Steve Jobs doing the first, like the reveal of the iPhone 1?
Yeah.
And he's like on stage and he's like, and then I just scroll and everybody's like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then I push the home button and then, oh my God. Yeah, it's kind of incredible.
It was I remember when the iPad came out and people were freaking out, like, why is it called Pad? That's silly. It's too big. It's too clunky. Critics were going crazy on that. And and I work in technology, so I'm like, what are you talking about? This is perfect, you know?
Yeah.
And anyway, there's always going to be the detractors and critics out there for sure. Let me ask you this. If you could get into, speaking of technology and kind of the fantastical realm, let's say we get off the phone, the Jazz DeLorean pulls up in front of your house, you can hop in, punch in the digits, go anywhere in history and see anybody. Who are you going to see live?
Well, I guess it has to be Charlie Parker. I mean, that is the standard from which all of this, I guess it's not only him, but to me, that is like the source of everything that I really passionately love about music. And to be able to hear him live would be incredible. You know, I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of people that have heard him play in person, and what they describe, you know, whether it's how they remember the moments where they were able to hear him, or if it's actually what it was, it just seems like the recordings we have, the video, none of it actually does it justice, which I can believe. So that would definitely be where I'd be going.
So, you know, we're in Kansas City, and it was obviously his stomping ground before he went on to New York. And there's a resident expert in Kansas City who has a radio show, and he's like, he's one of the most brilliant jazz minds I've ever met. His name is Chuck Haddock, and he wrote a book on Bird. And I remember one time we were doing a show, and this was before the pandemic, and he just kind of turned around, and we're right in front of the Mutual Musicians Foundation, which everybody in the world of jazz came through, from, you know, Miles to Art Blakey to anybody and everybody. And he just started telling me the story about how Berg was walking down the street eating a chicken leg and, you know, kind of talking to a friend and all of this, that, and the other. And it's like every time I get around Chuck, he orchestrates this Norman Rockwell painting of Charlie Parker just kind of walking around Kansas City as this regular guy just doing his thing. And just kind of, you know, all these people were passing a genius, one of the most brilliant musicians of all time, and he's just walking down the street, eating his food, dreaming about the next gig, you know?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
It's amazing. The reason why I asked that question is because I've been on 18 and Vine enough where I just sit there and think about all the ghosts that float around down there that I can't see, and how many of them played down there for so long. And it's amazing. You know, the history is amazing. So at the end of the day, all of these pockets and spheres of people have a perception of you: family, friends, fans, colleagues, students. But you ultimately are in control of your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Good question. That's something I haven't thought about a ton, but I know who I'd like to be. And I have done a lot of work in how I've treated people over the years. I've grown a lot as a person. I think I have a sense of humor that usually allows me to get along with most people. So I guess that would kind of be it. Someone that in the end is trying to just be a good person and help people when I can, and really be someone that does a good job providing for family and friends and all that kind of stuff. So that would be the bulk of it. The music part of it, I don't even really identify with. That's something that I do, but it's not who I am, I guess, in any way.
So, Walter, the album Return to Casual on Blue Note Records, out April 7th. talk to me a little bit about the best place for anybody out there to buy it if they want to, even stream it, and live shows, anything that's happening in your world?
Yes. Well, you can buy it directly through the Blue Note website. They have a shop there. You can stream it any place streaming happens. I believe it's everywhere at this point. And upcoming dates, this summer is very busy. I have a few things as a leader, but a lot of stuff coming up with as a side person, playing with Kendrick Scott. He also released an album on Blue Note, which is fantastic. Not just saying that because I'm there. I usually don't think much of things I'm on, but for this one, he did a great job of it. A trio record called Corridors. And then going out for a lot of the summer with Bill Stewart and his trio with Larry Grenadier. So a lot of dates coming up, especially in Europe. So excited.
These little lines of hearing musicians like yourself talking about live gigs after I just have looked at the calendar saying March 3 years ago and everything going away, is so good to see that everything's coming back to life. So thank you for opening up about, the album, your live world, your world of music. I appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks again for having me, sir.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in New York City, Houston, Boston, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Walter for his time, energy, and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, you can find Neon Jazz interviews on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.